I'm not sure anyone will believe this, but I stopped driving Township Road 384 after what happened. Most people around Martinsville, Saskatchewan know that road because it's quiet. Farmers use it. Grain trucks cut across it during harvest. In winter, it disappears under blowing snow until it looks like every other prairie road stretching into darkness. What most people don't know is that there used to be a volunteer weather station about 8 kilometers east of the highway. It wasn't anything important. Just a small government building where rainfall, wind, and temperature were logged decades ago, before everything became automated. It closed sometime in the early 90s, or at least that's what everyone says. I work as a refrigeration technician, and a few years ago, I spent most of my evenings driving between farms, fixing broken coolers and heating systems. During winter, emergency calls usually came after dinner because that's when furnaces decided to fail. It was January, -31, the kind of cold where your steering wheel feels made of stone and every breath freezes inside your nose. Around 8:45 p.m., I finished repairing a walk-in freezer at a poultry farm west of town. My GPS suggested Township Road 384 as the quickest way home. Normally I avoided it because the drifting snow covered sections of the road, but that night I was exhausted. I wanted my own bed. About 15 minutes into the drive, I noticed something odd. The temperature display in my truck suddenly climbed. -31, -24, -18. I actually laughed. Well, that's broken. Then it reached 2 degrees above freezing. Outside, everything was still buried under snow. My windshield remained coated with frost. The heater hadn't changed. It made absolutely no sense. A minute later, the display returned to -31, as though nothing had happened. I figured the sensor had failed. That explanation lasted exactly 4 more minutes, because that's when the radio started playing. Not static, music, soft piano. An old instrumental melody I'd never heard before. The problem was, my radio wasn't on. I reached over. The display was black, no power. Yet the music continued. Quiet, almost distant, like it wasn't coming from the speakers at all. It sounded outside. I rolled down my window, just enough to check. The cold punched into the truck instantly. The music became clearer, not louder, just closer, as though it had always been waiting beyond the glass. I rolled the window back up. The melody disappeared immediately. My hands tightened on the wheel. I told myself it was wind or ice vibrating somewhere inside the door. That's the thing about driving alone at night. Your brain wants everything to make sense, even when it doesn't. About 2 kilometers later, I saw lights ahead. Warm yellow lights, not headlights, windows. There was a small building sitting alone beside the road. I slowed down. I didn't remember anything being out there. The building looked old, wood siding, metal roof, one antenna leaning sideways. A faded government emblem hung beside the entrance, Weather Observation Station. I actually smiled. So that's where it was. Someone must have reopened it. The parking lot had only one vehicle, an old white pickup, no license plate, which was strange, but not as strange as the footprints. There weren't any. Fresh snow covered everything. The truck looked parked recently, yet the snow around it remained untouched. No tire tracks, no footprints, nothing. Like it had simply appeared. I kept driving. I wish I had kept going. About 500 meters later, my truck stalled. Not sputtered, not coughed. It simply shut off. Every light, every gauge. Silence. The heater stopped. The headlights vanished. Only the moon remained. I've experienced dead batteries before. This wasn't that. Everything had been working perfectly seconds earlier. I tried restarting it. Nothing. Again, nothing. Then, 3 slow knocks landed on the driver's side window. Knock. 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 I nearly screamed. Someone stood outside. An elderly man. Thin, grey coat, heavy winter hat. His face looked pale enough to blend into the snow. He wasn't smiling. He simply motioned for me to roll down the window. I cracked it an inch. The cold flooded inside. "You shouldn't stop here," he said calmly. "I didn't mean to." "I know." His voice sounded oddly familiar, like I'd heard it somewhere years ago. "I think my battery died." He looked toward the weather station. "No," he replied quietly. "They noticed you." I laughed nervously. "Who?" He didn't answer. Instead, he looked directly past me, toward the passenger seat. I followed his eyes. Nobody. When I turned back, the man had stepped away from the truck. Not walked, just farther away than seemed possible. Maybe 20 meters, standing perfectly still. Then he raised one finger. Not at me, past me, into the truck. Something moved behind my shoulder, not fast, not aggressively. Just enough to shift the corner of my vision, like someone leaning slightly closer. I spun around. Empty seat, nothing. When I looked forward again, the old man was gone. Completely gone. Flat prairie, fresh snow, no footprints, no shadow, no sign anyone had ever been there. My truck started instantly, as though nothing had happened. I didn't question it. I floored the accelerator. The weather station disappeared behind me. I reached Highway 12 20 minutes later and stopped at a gas station to calm down. The teenager behind the counter noticed my shaking hands. "You okay?" "Yeah." I hesitated. "Is there still a weather station off Township Road 384? He frowned. "My grandpa talks about one." "So it is still there?" "No. It burned down before I was born." I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, curiosity got the better of me. I drove to the local library. Old newspaper archives are surprisingly easy to access if you're patient. I searched weather station. Eventually, I found a small article from February 1991. 3 employees had vanished during a blizzard. No bodies were ever recovered. Search crews claimed fresh footprints repeatedly appeared around the station, despite no one being there. The article quoted an RCMP officer who described finding a government pickup parked outside with untouched snow beneath its tires. Exactly as I'd seen. I stared at the photograph. The building, the antenna, the faded emblem. It was identical. Except there was one detail I hadn't noticed. Standing near the entrance was an older employee wearing a grey winter coat. His name appeared beneath the picture. Walter McLeod, volunteer weather observer, missing, presumed dead. The same man who knocked on my window. I convinced myself I'd imagined the resemblance. Memory plays tricks, especially after fear. Months passed. Eventually, I stopped thinking about it. Then my phone rang. Unknown number, no caller ID. When I answered, all I heard was wind. Then, very softly, that same piano melody. I hung up immediately. The number didn't exist when I tried calling back. After that, little things started happening. Whenever I drove at night, my truck's temperature display occasionally jumped above freezing for exactly 60 seconds. Always 60, never more. My radio sometimes turned itself off while music continued playing somewhere outside. One winter afternoon, I found packed snow inside my garage, only a handful. Perfect boot prints leading to my truck, nothing else. No trail, no melted water, just frozen footprints ending at the driver's door. I sold the truck, bought another one. The temperature jumps continued. Last winter, curiosity overcame me again. I searched government archives online. Most records about the weather station had been digitized. Maintenance logs, inspection reports, supply requests. One report from January 1991 caught my attention. It wasn't supposed to be public. Someone had uploaded the wrong file. It wasn't about equipment. It was handwritten, almost like a journal. The final page read, "We've started hearing music after sunset. Walter says it's only wind." Frank heard knocking outside, despite nobody being there. Something keeps standing behind us whenever we count snowfall. Never look over your shoulder if someone tells you your name. They're trying to teach us how to notice them. The report ended there. No signature, no explanation. A week later, the document vanished from the archive. I assumed it had been removed. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined reading it. Until I checked my downloads folder. The file was still there. Except it wasn't the same anymore. The last sentence had changed. It now read, "There are 4 of us now." There had originally been 3 employees. I know that because I'd read every newspaper article. 3, not 4. I shut my laptop and never opened the file again. A few months ago, I ran into an elderly farmer at a hardware store. Somehow the conversation drifted toward old prairie roads. When I mentioned Township Road 384, he grew quiet. Then he asked me one question. "Did the old man warn you?" I didn't answer. He nodded anyway. "He always does? You knew him?" "I buried his brother." "But Walter disappeared." The farmer looked confused. "No? Walter came home." "What do you mean?" "He walked back into town 3 days after the storm." I felt my stomach drop. "Then why does everyone say he died?" The old farmer stared at me for a long moment before quietly saying, "Because whatever came back wasn't afraid of winter anymore." He refused to explain. He simply paid for his supplies and left. I've never found another record saying Walter survived. Every official document still lists him as missing. Sometimes I wonder if the farmer was confused. Old memories become unreliable. People misremember things. That's the logical explanation. At least, that's what I tell myself whenever I drive home after dark. But every January, for exactly 1 minute, my truck says it's above freezing. The radio falls silent. And somewhere beyond the glass, just outside the reach of the headlights, someone begins playing that same slow piano melody. I've learned not to roll the window down anymore, because I finally realized something that still keeps me awake. The first time I heard the music, it wasn't trying to lure me outside. It was drowning out something else. Something that had already been sitting in the passenger seat